Well, welcome to today's National Soil Survey Center webinar, Creating Story Maps. My name is Sean McVeigh, National Training Coordinator for the Soil and Plant Science Division, and I'm delighted to be your host today. This webinar is being recorded, and all participants join the webinar in listen-only mode. You receive the webinar's audio through your device's speakers. There is no telephone dial-in. If you're having audio difficulties, please check the various ways your computer speakers may be muted or have their volume set low, including the speaker adjustments available in the Adobe Connect interface. Be sure to turn up the volume if you need. You can maximize your webinar experience in Adobe Connect by shutting down Cisco AnyConnect and any other programs that might compete for bandwidth. This includes email in Microsoft Outlook and instant messaging in Skype for Business. Taking a look at our webinar room layout, Adobe Connect has content pods that include the feature presentation, handouts, Q&A, and the chat. Use the 4-arrow icon in the featured presentation pod to enter and exit the full screen view as you choose. We are here to answer your questions. To submit a comment or question for me or our presenter, use the Q&A pod and type in your question. I'll handle technical difficulties the best I can while hosting the webinar and interact with our presenter to answer your questions during the verbal Q&A period. I want to thank Paul Reich for being here to support our webinar. Paul, I'm going to turn the webinar over to you so you can introduce the topic and our presenters, and just remind people that Paul is a geographer for the Soil Services and Information Branch in the Soil and Plant Science Division in Beltsville, Maryland. Paul, I'll turn the time over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Sean. I really appreciate your hosting this webinar today. Hello, everyone. Like Sean said, I'm a geographer on the staff of the Soil Services and Information Branch. I'm also the leader of the Communications and Outreach Focus Team. And part of what we do as a team is to help develop communication products. You know, one of the really exciting products or platforms that we like to use is StoryMaps. And so today we're going to be looking at ArcGIS StoryMaps, helping to tell your stories. The purpose of this webinar is to give you an overview of StoryMaps and look at how we've been using them within the Soil and Plant Science Division to communicate our work. And I'm hoping that by the end, you will start thinking about how you can use StoryMaps to tell your stories. And before I continue, I just want you to be aware that at the end of the presentation, there's a list of all the online links to all the resources that we're going to be looking at today. And as Sean mentioned earlier, there's also a handout. There's a PDF version of this presentation that they're free to download. So here's the agenda. I'll start with general story map development and best practices. We'll look at how we're using story maps within the division. I'll show you some really good example story maps. We'll review the general scientific review and English editing process. And at the end, we'll look at some resources about how you can learn more about using story maps. So first off, what is a story map? I think most of you are probably already familiar, but just to remind everyone, they're simply online multimedia interactive stories. Creators of a story map, they use the Esri ArcGIS online environment, and story maps are typically comprised of a map, text, photos. You can include audio and video content, and you can also embed existing web content into your story. So for this first part, we're going to look at the general process of developing a story map and some best practices to consider. I'll talk about there's a recent major update to the StoryMap Builder platform, and then we'll look at the process for preparing your content, creating a design, and making good choices for developing an effective story. You know, one of the reasons that story maps have become so popular is that you have an array of different design options for presenting your story. So we're going to look more closely at some of those design choices. So, you know, story maps have been around for about 10 years, and it's recently changed with a major update to the platform. The original Esri StoryMaps is now called Classic StoryMaps, and then the new version is called ArcGIS StoryMaps. And you'll certainly notice that, that with the new version, StoryMaps has become one word instead of two. And throughout this presentation, I'll be referring to both versions, and I'll do the best I can to point out how the two platforms are different. So Esri released the original StoryMaps builder about 10 years ago, and the classic StoryMaps platform is structured in a way that is focused on templates. And so when you're using the classic story maps, the first thing you'll need to do is select a template to begin creating your story. And then it'll open up a specific builder for that template. And each of those builders works a little bit differently. And we're going to be looking at these in more detail a little bit later in the presentation. And about a year and a half ago, Esri released a completely new version of story maps. You know, their intention is to gradually phase out these classic story maps template-based builders, although you can still use those builders for a few more years, at least up until July of 24. Now, the new version has an interface that's dramatically different than the classic story maps. It has a much more streamlined, modern look and feel that allows you to use many of the classic templates, but in a more integrated fashion. So with this version, you'd just be using a single builder interface to create your story. It also has a new Express Maps feature for adding maps to your story. And there's a new collaboration feature so that you can share story development with your team. It also includes some enhancements that make your stories look better when viewing them on a tablet or a smartphone. With these new collaboration features, you can now create a shared update group. And this lets folks that are a part of the group in the ArcGIS online environment to edit and publish the same story map. And so this is really useful when you're developing a story map as part of a larger team. It's a much more efficient way of developing a story map. And if you're using the classic version, only the original creator can make edits and updates, which can be a lot more time consuming, especially if you're developing larger story maps. Okay, yeah, an important step when you're developing your story is really to identify your intended audience. You know, is the audience mostly internal, and perhaps for agency leadership or for staff training, or is the audience likely to be mostly external, or perhaps for our partners or the general public? And then you also need to think about the technical level of the audience so that you can better plan on the amount of detail you want to include in your story. Another important process in developing your story is really simply the content preparation, and start thinking about storyboarding. You need to look at the content that you have and start organizing your text and images. You know, think about what kinds of geographic data you want to share and how you might link your map with your existing photos and text. And I really recommend trying to go through a storyboarding process where you lay out your story and start deciding where your content best fits. And really, this planning phase will save you a lot of time and potential headache when you start actually going online to create your story map. So, often you may have images that are part of an existing PowerPoint presentation or a PDF document. And if you want to use images in there, before you can use those images, you need to convert them first to individual image files, because they're going to be uploaded into the ArcGIS online environment. And then you'll be able to insert them into your story. And I really need to emphasize how important it is to organize your content ahead of time. You might consider creating your initial layout in PowerPoint just to really help you develop your story before you start using the platform itself. Developing your story is definitely a process, and it takes time and effort as you start designing and building a story map. You're going to go through the process of repeated reviews and revisions, making modifications, so that you really end up with a story that is effective and useful to your audience. Depending on your story, a map may be a key component. You have the option of making your map interactive or static. If it's going to be an interactive map, you should make the effort to design the map for easy navigation and include attribute pop-ups that are easy to read and add useful details for the user. I mentioned earlier that ArcGIS StoryMaps, the new version, it gives you the ability to create an express map directly within the StoryMaps builder. And it lets you add points and lines and polygons and labels. And it's really good for, if you want to add a small locator map, or if you have particular areas you want to highlight, or even to show a particular route or a sequence of events. All right, design choices. Once you have your content well organized and you have an idea of how you want to tell your story, you can start to think about your story map design and the choices that the platform offers. There are a series of templates that are part of the classic story maps and that are integrated within the newer platform. So in this next section, we're going to look more closely at these templates. This first template is called the journal template. And in the new ArcGIS StoryMaps, this is called the sidecar. And the sidecar can be either docked or floating. What it does is it consists of a large media panel on one side and then the narrative panel on the other. And then the media will change as you scroll through the narrative in the sidecar. And then the sidecar can include text, images, and video. This next template is called Cascade. And the basic layout of a story in the new ArcGIS StoryMaps is the scrolling narrative, just like the Cascade in the classic templates. And it consists of floating text and full screen media to create a more immersive experience. And then the new version also includes what they call slideshow. And it works similar to Cascade, but the navigation is horizontal instead of the vertical layout that we're used to. This next template is called Series. And with this template, you can add a series of stories or other ArcGIS applications and any other kind of web content. And you can configure that either in a tab format or a bulleted layout. But it's really useful for organizing sets of related content. And later on, I'll show you some examples of how this is being used. This next template is called Shortlist. And this one allows you to share a larger set of places, up to 100 places with your audience. And the new version recently added what they call Explorer Map Tour to replicate the Shortlist template. And it really provides a more flexible exploration of both the map and your photo content. This next template is called Map Tour, and it allows you to create a guided tour. The emphasis is a little bit more on the images, and you can also include a series of text and video along with your images. But it's really good for creating a sequentially ordered group of images and locations to allow you to give a kind of a controlled tour type of environment to the story. This last template is the swipe template. And so you simply use swipe to compare two maps. You could use it to show a before and after view of aerial imagery, or you can show change over time. And it really does a great job of encouraging interaction and engagement. And then, so now you kind of have an idea of a lot of the main design choices that are available. So in the next section, we're going to look at some examples. But first, I wanted to make you aware of some visual identity guidance so that you can make sure that you add the appropriate logo to your story map. And so I have information here on FPAC provides some good guidance on the proper usage of our agency logo. And then for the National Cooperative Soil Survey logo, the division has got some really good guidance on the different kind of logos that you can use and the proper ways to use these logos. And again, at the end, you'll find links to all of these guidance documents. For adding the logo within your story map, in the new version, under the design section, there's a part where you can customize the logo. And in the classic version, there's a header tab in the settings window where you can add the logo in the most appropriate fashion. And so for this next part, I want to focus on how a Soil and Plant Science Division uses story maps to help with communicating our work. Story map is a great way to increase awareness about your team's activities. You can provide details about your project activities and really help people, better understand the importance of your work. It just has some screenshots of some story maps from the urban focus team and the coastal zone, soil survey focus team, and for the Cacao for Peace project. So you should really try to think about how you might use a story map to promote your team or your project. Another way to use story maps is to highlight success stories. In this example, the ecological sites focus team, they wanted to share their recent success they had with their work in Hawaii. And so we were able to put together some images and text to create a short story to increase awareness and hopefully encourage similar efforts in other parts of the country. I know as a division, we have a huge number of success stories to share, whether it's highlighting technical soil services we provide to customers or sharing new techniques in soil survey. And this is definitely an area where we can do a lot more. This example on customer-focused web access, this is a really interesting example of using StoryMap's platform to create an easier way for the public to access their online resources. So this example is from the NRCS Texas State Office. Alan Stanke, he's the state soil scientist in Texas, and one of Alan's staff, Stephen Deal, he's a cartographer. He was the main creator. I think he had some assistance by Alex Stum, who's on the South Central Regional staff. And so what they did is they created the NRCS Texas dashboard. And what they did was use the map series template to create a series of tabs that provide direct access to many of our online databases, making it much easier for customers to find the resources they need. So I really want to thank Alan Stanke for allowing me to share this, and also thank Joe Parsley. He's the regional director for the South Central region. He was the one that made me aware of this example. And so I think, think about how you might want to package your stories or other online resources to help improve our outreach to our customers. Another use of StoryMaps is as an alternative to PowerPoint. Last year, the acting deputy chief for Soil Science Resource Assessment Deputy Area was Mary Podel. And she asked the staff from each of the divisions and centers to put together a presentation for a leadership meeting. And so we decided to try, instead of using a PowerPoint, why not try a StoryMap? And so we were able to combine lots of text and images and maps and videos into a StoryMap that I think really went above and beyond what you can do in a typical PowerPoint. And so far I've talked a lot about StoryMaps, and now I want to spend some time showing you some live examples that I hope to highlight some of the things we've looked at so far. But before I do that, we have a poll question for you guys to answer. So Sean, if you can please bring up the poll. And it's a question that's fairly simple. We talked about these StoryMap templates. So which template would you like to try to develop your stories with? And you can have more than one answer. We'll just give you guys a few minutes to answer, put your choices down, but I mean, the point is to try to think about all the like I said earlier, StoryMaps have become so popular because you have lots of choices. There's lots of different ways to tell a story, and each of these templates or styles or design styles, they can really have a dramatic effect on the interactions and the engagement of your reader as they go through a particular story.
Well, Paul, the numbers have settled down pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and broadcast the results if you want to talk for just a moment about the responses. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so it looks like for Cascade, about 38%, Journal, 22%, Map Tour looks like to be the winner, 60%, Map Series, 44%, Shortlist, got 14%, Swipe, 34%, but yeah, I think you'll see in some of the examples that I'm going to show you how others have used some of these templates, and again, I really think that thinking about the template that you want to use before you even
open the software before you get into the platform, I think it's really, really important to do. So thanks for answering that question. So next I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to try this, Sean. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to share my desktop. And hopefully I can get to where I want to go. Okay. So hopefully you can see this first story map I want to share is Cacao for Peace project. And so this particular story map uses the Cascade template, and it starts off with a map of the project location in Colombia, and it has some basic information on these are the actual sites that were sampled. And so the user, if they can click on any of the sites and bring up some basic information about that site. And then so I have a map in the beginning, but the actual emphasis is not on the map. It's really on these great photographs that really give you a good idea. First, it talks about the cacao plant, which I think not many people in this part of the world are maybe familiar with, but it has a nice section on soil survey, and so basically documents the folks that were actually doing the survey and how generally how the survey was conducted. But you can see how it's a very immersive experience. There's not a lot of text. The emphasis is on really sharing all the people that were involved in the project. But you can see it's very, very simple. This is an example where the images really are telling the story, very little in the way of text. This next example is on dynamic soil properties. And then in this particular example, it's organized using a series, the series template. And this allows us to really have access to two separate story maps that were developed in different ways. And so this first tab is really just a simple introduction to what are dynamic soil properties. And then the next tab is a story map that highlights the DSP work in South Dakota. So in this example, Sky Wills, she provided the content for the story when I was able to develop using a Cascade template. And so just like the previous example, this has that immersive feel with the floating text over the full screen images. And so again, it really lets the images do the talking. Now I did include a map in this one where it shows you the general project area. And if you click on a particular county, it'll tell you the year of the project and just a very simple image of the particular soil that's typical in that county. But you continue to scroll through, and again, you just have these images with the floating text box, and of course you can integrate graphs and images within the text boxes. And then of course you're able to add links to different sites for more information. And at the end of this one, it actually automatically starts up with a video that features Sky Wills talking about dynamic soil properties. So that we're still in this tabbed interface. So I can just simply click on the New Jersey DSP projects tab, and that we have another story map. And so this one was developed by Edwin Muniz. He's the Assistant State Soil Scientist in New Jersey. And so this one uses the journal template. It provides a lot of details about their work. And it also includes some a really interesting use of embedded content. Keep scrolling down until we get to this particular section here. And so they were able to include this app that was developed, I think, using the RShiny program. And so what it does is it allows you, the user can go directly into the app and select a particular variable, and the chart automatically updates. And so it really adds another element to the user experience. It allows a little extra interaction within the story. And then this last example I want to show you is, it's from the Urban Soil Focus team. Jake Islib, he's the resource soil scientist in Connecticut. He was the primary developer of this. And so Jake worked with members of the Urban Soil Focus team, and they created what I think is a really compelling story. And what I like about this one is that it uses a variety of designs to keep the story interesting and interactive. So let's have a look at what they did here. So, just starting off with the map, they have a legend that basically shows you the publishing dates for these major metro areas throughout the country. But you can zoom around anywhere on the map. You click on the map, and it really just has this basic information of when the survey was done, and it has a direct link straight to the Web Soil Survey to allow you a lot more exploration if you so choose to do. But as the reader goes through the story map, and again, this is using this map journal interface, and you can see as we go through it, it automatically updates the major image talking about why urban soils are important. And then you get to this section on urban soil profiles. And what's interesting about this one is that they were able to integrate another type of story map using the map tour. And I think I remember you folks said 60% of you wanted to try out the map tour. Well, here's a great example of the map tour in action. And so what it does, it really gives you a flexible way of sequentially going through a series of images, and you can see the map updates automatically as a person goes through. Or alternatively, you could zoom back out, and you can click directly on the map and select images in that way. So if we zoom over here, we can start clicking on individual sites and bring up the soil profiles for those areas. But a very, very neat way to present the soil profiles within this story. And then we simply close this, and we're back to the main urban soils story map. And as we continue, in this example, they were looking at how urban soils are mapped. And so in this case, they've actually used the swipe tool. So swipe to the past. So what they've done is they allow us to look at this geology map from 1902 of the same exact area. And so we can compare it with this modern aerial image. And it's just really a nice interactive way for the reader to explore your story, to really explore the area that you're working in. I think it's really effective. And then they continue to talk about, field technology and methods, how it's all related to technical soil services. One thing I like about is that they've done effective use of including people in a lot of their photos, and I think a typical story you'll get more interest if you do include the people that are involved in the project. I think it's really important to include the folks in there. And then at the end, they have some great simple links for getting more information. So I think this is really a great example of really how to create an effective story. So Sean, I think I'm going to try and go back to my PowerPoint. Okay. Okay. So, once you've created your story map and you want to publish and share it, you really first need to submit it for internal review. And, the purpose of internal reviews are just to make sure that we're using sound science, that, we're providing novel contributions to understanding, and that we're simply supporting our agency and the division missions. The first part of the process is the English edit. And so you would be submitting your story map and a review certificate form to your supervisor for review and signature. You would then submit the story map, the text related to that story map, and the review certificate form to the NSSC editor's email, and be sure to include all the captions and the headings and all the text that are all part of that story map. So the editors will help you with the process, and then just be mindful that the national leadership will be reviewing these particular information. And then after the English edit is completed, you're going to be sending us the review certificate and to John Andrioni. And so you would be submitting the form, and make sure that you include the link of the story map within the posting location field of the form. And just a reminder to be careful of the naming conventions that are required. And typically the scientific review would be done within 7 working days. But at the end of the document of this presentation, you'll see all the guidance on the SBSD's internal review SharePoint. So I'm hoping that by now you want to learn more about story maps. And so these last few slides are about some great resources to help you along. So first off, Esri has created a learning plan for folks to learn more about story maps. And so they have a series of general resources, including instructor-led training, free training seminars, tutorials, and some story maps that really give you some good guidance on how to build a story map. Esri has some other great resources, including a variety of helpful tutorials and videos and articles that can help you get started. They have a great selection of StoryMaps webinars that go into some really good details about how others are using story maps, so you can get some really great ideas from their YouTube section. And then the Esri has a story maps team, and they provide a weekly blog, what they call weekly waypoint, and it's really another great resource for keeping up to date on a lot of the enhancements that Esri has been providing for story maps. And then really important is to be a part of the GeoNet community. It's Esri's community of users, and you can really find a lot of answers to many of the questions that you're likely to have as you start developing your story maps. And then as promised, here's the list of the online resources that we've looked at today. Here's a list of a lot of the links that will help you get started using story maps. I've included a lot of other story map examples that you can really get some great ideas from. This list definitely is not a comprehensive list. I know there's lots of other great examples from folks throughout the country that I haven't included. But I've also included, again, the agency guidance on logo usage and also the internal review process. And so this is all I have for today. I really appreciate the opportunity to give you guys an overview of story maps. And I really hope it helps you to find some inspiration. I know that there's so many great stories out there, and I really hope that you'll be encouraged to share yours. So, thanks again. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Paul. And I'll just remind people to please put your questions in the Q&A. And we've had several come in, Paul, but I'm going to cut to the front of the line with my question. I'm sure that when you create these, you have to have a source of images. It just doesn't have a catalog with it of images that are ready to go for these different stories that we would be creating. So can you recommend any image sources for people to try to get high quality images?
Well, in most of the story maps that I've worked on, the images are from all the people that are involved in a particular project. But if you're looking for more general images, I know as an agency or as a division, some folks, especially public affairs folks, they do have access to Adobe stock. And so if they're interested in accessing some of they literally have millions of images available on Adobe stock. That would be one source. Another source, of course, is the NRCS, the main website. They do have a photo gallery of photographs from around the country that were produced by various NRCS staff. And I believe there are some other resources related specifically to soils that are on the Soil Survey Center's website.
And I'll just add to that, because I've been trolling around looking for images for different online trainings and use in presentations, and a lot of these other government agencies have their own photo gallery. So I know Fish and Wildlife Service has their photo gallery, ARS has a photo gallery. So if you do a search online for those different photo galleries, you'll come up with those, and they're, of course, government produced and free for use and free from copyright issues generally. Sometimes people like to snag things off of Google, and they're not always free for use and have some copyright issues with those, so be careful of that. Well, Paul, like I said, we do have several questions that have come in, and Scarlett has a question. Can you share the link to the NRCS Texas dashboard story map used as an example? Looks cool, would like to check it out.
Yes, so if you're able to download the handout that's part of the current webinar, you'll be able to see the link I've included the link to the NRCS Texas dashboard as one of the StoryMap examples.
And another question from Kanika, was some of the content that was incorporated in that last example built in PowerPoint at all?
You know, some of the examples, the one example I know from my experience is that the one that we did for the SSRA presentation, a lot of those images that we used in the SSRA presentation were generated originally in PowerPoint, and simply just saving anything you create in PowerPoint, you simply save it as a JPEG image, and then you can easily bring it into a StoryMap.
And Aaron asks, what was the name of the app that was embedded in the New Jersey story?
Oh, it's using RShiny. I'm not an expert in how to use the RShiny software. Certainly, probably Edwin Muniz would be able to could talk more about how he created that particular app.
And some folks have put that in the chat if you need to know how to spell that Shiny app. It's a package in R. Another question, what would you recommend for training or documentation for someone new to StoryMaps? So I know you listed several trainings, free and for a fee, but is there one in particular that stands out for someone that's new to StoryMaps?
I think like in this list here, I would start off with some of the fundamentals part, and just go through all the free items first, and then it's the kind of thing where typically you kind of have to jump in and give it a try, and start off small. So start off, if you have an existing map, add the map. If you have one or two photos, add a couple photos, and then add some text. And just to get a feel for how the platform works. And it's not very difficult to use for sure, but it's just like anything, it takes some effort to get used to how everything is structured and how everything is organized. But I think Esri has really done a great job of providing lots of resources that really give you some great examples. And even some of their story maps, they kind of go step by step through how to make a story map. The only other confusing part is the fact that I talked about the so-called classic story maps versus the newer ArcGIS story maps. They're quite different in how they approach the development of a story. So I think if you're new to story maps, you've never used it, you're probably better off sticking with the new version versus the old version, because they're eventually going, like I said, they're eventually going to discontinue the old builders. And so I think you're probably better off sticking with the newer version.
All right, Megan asks, does the Cascade option offer the same functions as the map tour, for example, the swipe tool?
Yeah, so with the new interface, the new ArcGIS StoryMaps, yes, you're able to basically integrate most of those styles, including the swipe tool, within your story. So it's not like you have to select one or the other, or exclude one or the other.
And Tammy asks, are images that others have used for their story map available in the system you use to develop the story map? So in other words, can they grab and use what someone else has already used?
From my experience, no. So when you start developing a story map, you'll start uploading images and your content to your content interface when you're logged into ArcGIS Online. And so certainly as a requirement for developing these, you need to have an account with ArcGIS Online. For any NRCS employee that's not on ArcGIS Online and you want to get on there, I think you simply, you can go into the service now, and they have a selection for geospatial support, and you can request there that you want to set up a new account as a ArcGIS Online user.
And there's a question in the chat about, is there a web page to list or archive story maps that have already been created?
Currently we do not have a central location for story maps. Some of the focus teams, they have their story maps linked from their focus team web pages. But I think as the lead for the communications and outreach team, that's definitely something that we can recommend, is that we have a separate section that includes all of the publicly available story maps. That's a good idea.
Yeah, people seem to like that idea in the chat. There's some traffic back and forth on that. What I missed here in the Q&A is from Christy, and you may have already covered this. Do you need ArcGIS to be included in a shared update group? Yes.
So if you're going to be on the shared update group, you would already be, you already would have an account with the NRCS ArcGIS Online platform. So yeah, you do have to be on that platform. And then what we would need to do, so if you're on that platform and you know you're as a team, you're going to be developing a story map, you would simply ask one of the ArcGIS Online administrators to create a group, and then you would add all the members you want to that group. And then if you're the original creator of a story map, you would then share that story map with that group, and therefore all the members of that group would then have the ability to edit the story map and to also publish the story map.
Well, Paul, that's exhausted all of our questions in the chat and those in the Q&A that I've seen. So I think that it's time to close things out. I want to thank you, Paul, for your time and effort to make the presentation, and thanks to all the participants for joining in. The on-demand recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel, along with over 150 webinars and training videos. Simply search for NRCS, NSSC, or this topic in YouTube, and you'll find the recordings. Feel free to let your colleagues know within and outside of NRCS about this training opportunity, and this concludes our webinar